Hey everybody, it's Ed. Before we get started, I've got a lot of new Patreon supporters I want to thank. Jackson Moeller, Killian Lord, Adam Gall, Samantha Robinson, Mark Brooks, and Jared Kirst. All these folks signed up to support the podcast through Patreon, which is monthly support that I greatly appreciate. If you want to learn more about Patreon or any other options, you can go to mountainandprairie.com/support. Thank you very much. Hey, this is Ed Robertson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in land conservation or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work, has an interesting story, and loves the American West. My guest today is Anna Brones. Anna is a freelance journalist, author, artist, and producer who is prolific in all of her creative endeavors. She's published 4 books, produced documentary films, is currently publishing a quarterly print journal about food, and much more. One of her most recent projects was the Women's Wisdom Project, in which she showcased the wisdom of inspiring women by creating 100 papercut portraits. All of Anna's work is authentic and enlightening, and her personal commitment to cultivating creativity is instructive and inspiring. Growing up in the Pacific Northwest, Anna has always had a deep appreciation for nature and community. She studied, lived, and worked in many different countries and cities, but several years ago decided to return to her hometown in Washington State, where she and her husband currently live. As you'll hear in our conversation, Anna has read and thought deeply on the importance of place, and offers a unique perspective on what it means to be truly connected to a landscape or community. Anna and I connected via Skype, and we had a wide-ranging conversation about her creative process, her current and past artistic projects, the importance of wilderness and nature, and much more. We started by discussing her Creative Fuel Challenge email newsletter, an amazing resource that's been very helpful to me during these past few crazy months. We also talk about her Women's Wisdom Project, how she managed to research all 100 inspirational women, and the process of creating 100 intricate pieces of art. Anna talks about her experience leading kids on wilderness leadership retreats, as well as how camp and wilderness experiences in her own youth helped to shape her life and career. And as usual, we talk about favorite books, her most powerful outdoor experience, and she also offers up some excellent words of wisdom for anyone with creative aspirations. There are tons of resources mentioned in this episode. Be sure to check out the episode notes for links to everything, including a few bonus resources that Anna and I discussed before and after recording the actual episode. Hope you enjoy. Well, I was thinking that the way we could start out is by talking about your Creative Fuel Challenge that you started putting out a while back. I guess right as the chaos around the pandemic was descending, you decided to put out this positivity in the world. So can you talk a little bit about that email and kind of how you decide what it is and how you decided you wanted to do that?
Well, I've been interested in creativity for a long time, but I guess I got more interested in it and researching more of it last year. So last year, at the beginning of 2019, I started a monthly newsletter called Creative Fuel. And the idea with that was kind of to explore creativity. And originally, I think I thought of it more as doing prompts, but it's kind of evolved into more of a, self-reflection, introspection, connecting life and creative process, depending on what's happening in the month. So at the beginning of kind of shutdown in March, I just thought, I think people probably want something to do. And also just being a really big believer in that art and creativity are things that can really get us through difficult times. It just felt like a good moment to start doing that. Yeah. So lacking any innovation at the time, I was like, I have this newsletter called Creative Fuel. This will be the Creative Fuel Challenge. So I just started doing it. And at the beginning, I think I did like 3 prompts a week. I did kind of a lot. Because there just wasn't really anything else going on, and I'd had all my other work kind of pulled out from underneath me. And So I just had time to devote to it. And so I then thought, oh, it'd be fun to involve some other people. So I had kind of some guest posts too. So my friend Brendan Leonard, I think, who's been on your show.
Yes.
Yeah. He did a guest one for me on like how to make kind of a chart or graph based off of emotions, which I thought was a really fun prompt, just to sort of learn about his process. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't just always me coming up with them, but yeah, so did a bunch and then kind of dialed down to maybe 2-ish a week. So I just did number 49 this week, and then I'm going to send out number 50, hopefully tomorrow.
Nice.
And that one's going to be a little bit different than before. And then after that, I'm going to take a little bit of a break or at least not keep myself on a very regular schedule with it, because it's just gotten a little much.
Yeah.
So I just need to take a little bit of time and space away from that, because I've got this other thing that I'm kind of trying to work on, a personal project, and it just, I end up feeling like I don't have time for that. So, but that doesn't mean it's going to go away. I do love this idea of, I don't know, offering people not just a prompt, but I guess providing people the space. Well, one, to allow themselves to give themselves space, but two, maybe just a small moment of introspection or something that is a little thought-provoking, or just a few minutes to sit with something and just be with it. I mean, I think that is important, and I know I'm not good at doing it for myself.
Yeah.
So sometimes you just need somebody else to tell you to do that or encourage you to do that. So I think that's, in all of those things, that's kind of the driving force, I would guess. Yeah.
Was there a point or some experience you had that made you focus more on putting things like that out into the world for other creatives, almost being like a teacher or a motivator for other creatives? Because, I mean, the amount of work you put out when you go, and the different types of work is pretty amazing to me, how prolific you are in a lot of different ways. And I would think that's hard enough. That's hard enough to figure out how to keep all these different balls in there that you have going. But then you've decided, no, I'll do all my own creative projects, but I'm also going to help other people be creative. So what drives that, or why do you do that? Because it's a very generous act, and I can only imagine how limited your time could be. So why is that so important to you?
That's a good question. I mean, honestly, in a very non-romantic, just practical way, I mean, I think in this day and age, if you work for yourself or work freelance and you're in some type of a sort of creative work field, there is an element of needing to sort of sustain some type of content or production so you sort of stay relative. Mm-hmm. I mean, relevant. There certainly is that. I mean, that's like the commercial side of things that is maybe less poetic.
No, I think that's important for people to hear. Yeah.
But I think that there is this element of, I know that I work better with deadlines, right? So I know that I'm pretty bad. I won't say bad. I don't have, for example, a personal practice of writing every day. But I do know that I put a lot of time and effort in writing into my Creative Fuel newsletter, and then also Creative Fuel Challenge. So for me, it's one way of kind of being accountable to myself to just show up and do something. And I could show up and do that and not send it out or not share it with anyone. But then it feels like if I've done the work and it feels valuable to me, maybe it's valuable to other people. So why not just kind of share that and distribute it? So I think that's kind of one component of it. I think the kind of honing in on creativity, I think, was kind of spurred by, I did a artist in residency 3 summers ago. I don't know. Time.
Yeah, we're in a time warp right now.
Who even knows anyway? Yeah. But on Bainbridge Island, so near Seattle, there's a place called Bladell Reserve. And it's a large piece of property, and it's basically a private garden, really beautiful, kind of just an oasis, kind of an escape from the city for people who can take the ferry over to Bainbridge. And there's this beautiful house on the property that they offer up to artists in residence. And so they basically have one artist a month for the whole year that comes and stays there. So I had done a residency there. And while I was there doing that, so the whole thing, I mean, nature is like very important to me and important to my own creative practice. But while I was there, I read two different books. So one was The Nature Fix by
that's good.
Williams. Yeah. And then the other one was Blue Mind by Wallace J. Nichols, which is all about basically the power of water and the kind of the intersection of water, ocean, and like neuroscience. And so how water is just really beneficial for us in a variety of ways, creativity included. And I think that in reading those books back to back in that place, I just got kind of, I don't know, you just have those moments sometimes where you're like, oh, this is a thing I want to pay attention to. So while I was there, I just ended up kind of writing about creativity quite a bit for myself, and then kind of came out of it and just kept going with it. Because I wouldn't say that before that, I mean, I think I always had sort of creativity and creative process on my mind, but I wasn't necessarily exploring it. So that was kind of the turning point. If I could like identify one. And so then I think since then I've just been really interested in, anything that relates to creativity, creative process, and kind of the intersection of creativity, outdoors, neuroscience. I find all that stuff really fascinating.
Yeah, it definitely is fascinating. And that book, Nature Fix, actually, Brendan let me borrow that book from his, and I've thought about getting Florence Williams on the podcast because that book is so, I don't know, it's one of these books that I read it and it confirmed all the things that I thought that I didn't already, that I didn't have science to back up, just basically that nature is so good. I still need to read Blue Mind. You said that you don't have a daily writing routine, or like you're not going to write a certain number of words per day or anything like that. But how do you balance this prolificness that you have of producing all this stuff with not just being so hard on yourself or not just pushing yourself way too hard? Because I've seen in a lot of your work and a lot of your writing, you seem to come back to this idea of balance and finding kind of a middle ground, not going too hard one way or the other. And so can you talk about the process of finding balance in your creative life?
Yeah, I think it changes every day.
Yeah.
Right? If you were going to visualize it, I think it's that there's an overall balance, but that on the day-to-day, there can probably be a lot of ups and downs. Right? So I have times when I do a lot, and then I have other times when I don't do a lot. And that, I don't know, it sort of balances out. But I will also say that most of the things that I end up writing about are all things that I also should put into practice. Like I had some two very close friends of mine that I saw about a week and a half ago, right before the West was covered in smoke. We sat outside. That's why I specifically remember that moment.
The good old days.
Yeah. But they're both artists, and I was just saying, I just feel like I haven't done anything in the last few weeks. And they were just like, Anna, come on. Like, you are the first person that if we said that, you would be the first person to tell us that our value is not wrapped up in what we produce and what we do, and that it's important to take a break. Remember that we're in a pandemic. You've gone through some personal stuff. There's a whole variety of reasons why you don't feel. And I was like, yeah, I know, but I'm supposed, and they're, and it's just so funny how I think we're always facing those inner critics and demons. And I think that anyone who says they don't is either able to tap into something that I don't know how, or they're just lying.
Yeah.
Because I think that kind of questioning or feeling like you have a lot of drive one day and no drive the next day, like that's all very, very normal. And so I think that finding the balance is more of a regularly checking in, because it's not like, oh, I found the formula for balance and now I just ride that wave. Right?
Yeah. You got it all figured out.
The next day.
Sure.
So I think that balance is really kind of a daily process more than anything. And I definitely don't always feel like I have it. Actually, I would say most times I don't feel like I have it.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's like the only thing that I've done consistently for a long time is running. So I feel like all my analogies come back to that. But it's just most days when you're running, it's not effortless. It's kind of hard. And maybe 1 out of 50 days, you might find what they call the flow or the zone or whatever. But the point is that it's a little bit challenging. And it seems like with all the creatives that I talk to, that's kind of what they say as well. When you do find yourself stuck, and this is kind of a worn out question that I imagine you get a lot, but I am interested in the answer. When when you find yourself, whether, call it blocked or unmotivated or procrastinating or distracted, do you have any certain techniques for snapping out of that? Or is there any, I wouldn't say magic bullet, but anything that like a time-tested thing that you can apply to be like, all right, let's get to work? Or is it just as simple as like, I got to get to work?
Well, I think it depends, because sometimes the block is in something that you've been working on for a bit and you just like can't seem to push through. Mm-hmm. And in those moments, I think it's like, just let it go and go do something else. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where, things like getting outside, physical exercise, it's really important. And there's plenty, again, of research to show why that is, that, we sort of give our body sort of a focus that it needs, something it needs to work on. And it kind of allows the brain to be in this like free space. So I think letting go is probably a good one. I mean, the distraction thing, like you just mentioned, I think that's probably the one that I struggle the most with, because it can be, we just live in a world of distractions.
Yes.
Right. And you have to be really, really intentional about opting out of that. And I am not always great at that. I mean, I don't know how many times I checked Instagram yesterday, but it was an embarrassing amount. And there's something about getting into that in the morning and then just constantly doing it for the rest of the day. Whereas if I don't start with distraction in the day, it's easier to manage. Uh-huh. So I think that, but getting away from whether you're in the block or whether you're distracted, I think just like physically getting yourself out of the way of that is probably first and foremost the thing to do. But then also, Brendan told me this thing once, and I don't remember. It was a line from some other writer, and I don't remember who it was, but it was something about experiencing writer's block, and this analogy to like, have you ever heard a plumber say that they have like plumber's block? It's like, no, they just go and like do the work. Mm-hmm. And I think that, I don't know, I think when we talk about creative work, it's like, I think we like to get a little heady about it. It's like, oh, I'm super stuck because I have all this stuff and it's really difficult. And it is difficult sometimes, but you can also just show up and keep working at it. And like you said with your running analogy, I mean, that doesn't mean it's going to be fun or feel great all the time, but you just got to keep showing up. And I think that's often why people with creative work, maybe who don't have a practice of it or who are new to it, it's really easy to jump ship.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, whoa, this is too much. And I think if you keep showing up, that's probably the thing that I respect the most in, artists who I really like. It's like, you just keep returning to the thing that you do and keep working at it and challenge yourself to release the expectation of what that work is going to lead to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Over the last few months, I've been trying to run, or I've run 3 miles every single day, no breaks. And it's, most of the time it's not a big deal, but like yesterday I was traveling and it did not fit easily in the schedule and it was smoky and I didn't want to go and I forced myself to do it. And I feel like that has already, just in doing that for maybe 2 months, is already translated into making me be able to push through stuff like some of this podcast stuff or any of my work writing, just like, yeah, all right, we got to do a little bit every day, go, go, go. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing how those kind of things can translate, and just the commitment to daily practice, even if it's not a lot, it adds up, it seems to add up, at least for me.
Yeah, definitely. And being mindful too that we have these little reptile brains, that are like, I don't want to do this thing. Like, I just want to break. I want to treat. I want to scroll. I want to, and it's like, you just have to manage that. And if managing that is, okay, I'm going to work for half an hour and then I'm going to allow myself 5 minutes to do whatever it is that I want to do. Everybody works differently too. So I think that it's, what works for me doesn't necessarily work for you and vice versa. But I think that there is something to regularly showing up. And I think to your point with the running, I think that is very much a practice of ritual, mm-hmm. right? It's kind of like you're going to show up and do that no matter what. And what you're essentially doing is telling your body, and with creative practice, you're telling your brain, like, I'm just going to show up right now and I don't really have a choice. Mm-hmm. So this is what I'm doing and I'm just going to keep doing it and it's going to continue to happen. And I think that's actually really important for us.
So earlier when you were talking about the email, you were talking about the practical kind of the almost business importance of having contact with your audience. And, I run into that as well with social media. And I generally don't like it. And it is, the Instagram especially, it can just be so addictive. But in your mind, how do you balance the need for social media and the fun part of it, the good part? I've met a lot of great people through social media, and a lot of great people from the podcast have come through social media. But at the same time, it can just be this endless distraction. So, I mean, in your mind, how do you balance those two, or how do you work with that, get the most out of it without letting it take over your life?
I don't know. I think, again, it's probably when I got back to what I said before about it's kind of like a daily check-in, because I think what feels balanced one week doesn't feel balanced another week. Mm-hmm. And I think even in the times when I've been like, okay, here's your schedule of what you're doing this week, and you're going to be a little bit more intentional about things, like I can still kind of spiral into, the depths of distraction. So I think it depends. I think for me, it's hard because it's all my personal, like it's me, it's Anna Brones. It's sure. Not a different company, or it's not, it's all me. So then I have to kind of make a choice of what is, the personal fuels the business, because I do stuff with work that is what I'm personally interested in. But like, when is personal time just personal time? And I think that's probably more the balance that I find I have to focus on the most, and is the most important for me to focus on. So that's things like, it's the same stuff that you read about in like top 5 articles, I think, on how to manage this stuff, right? It's like setting limits, having a limit of, you don't check your email after a certain time. You don't check social media after a certain time. I try to be pretty good about not being, on Instagram or social media on the weekends. Yep. I can break that rule sometimes too, but I try to be pretty good about that. And I will say that has been really helpful. So, I don't know. I don't really have a good answer for that.
Well, no, I think that's important.
They're designed for us to interact with them in this way. Do you know what I mean? Like they are intentionally made for us to use them in this kind of like frantic, chaotic, obsessive way. Like somebody actually made them work that way.
Oh yeah. A lot of really smart people with billions of dollars invested billions of dollars to make us look at that. I mean, I think that's very instructive for people to hear that you don't know, because I think, myself included, sometimes you can think, oh, well, these people like Anna or anybody, they've got it figured out and they've got this secret. And if I only knew their secret, that's how Tim Ferriss has made as much money as he has, because he presents things as if there's this secret formula, and if you follow you'll be fine. But there is not. There's not. I mean, and if there was, it's like that formula that works for me, even if I had one, again, like I said before, it wouldn't necessarily work for you. Yep. So I could give you a formula, but it might do the exact opposite for you. You should sell one for like $19.99.
I was going to say I should make an app. It's just called The Formula. Mm-hmm.
So I mentioned how prolific you are, and there's so many different things we could talk about. But the one thing I definitely want to talk about is your Women's Wisdom Project with the papercuts. How did that come to be? Yeah,
so that's a thing that I started in January of 2018. And at the time, I had a couple of books that I just read. There was just a few things that kind of collided where I was like, okay, I want something that allows me to kind of research women's history or inspiring women in a deeper way, because there's so many women I don't really know about. And then Kickstarter actually does a thing in January called Make 100. Mm-hmm. And so I had made one portrait of a woman. So every portrait in that series it's a portrait of a woman with a quote. So I had made one just kind of randomly. And then I saw that thing on Kickstarter pop up, and I was like, oh yeah, I could do 100 of these. Sure. I'll launch a campaign, that's kind of how I roll. I never really think things all the way through or have any strategy. I'm just like, this is a thing I want to do. And so, I don't know, raised a little bit of money to at least facilitate. Well, in the end, you just lose money when you work on personal projects, I think, but that's fine. That is what it is,
Yeah.
I know I can't actually use that expression anymore. That's kind of tainted, but, anyway, so I just started making them, and then I don't know what number it was after, but I think I got a little ways in. It was just like, oh shit, like, what did I do?
80 more to go.
Yeah, and honestly, I will say that, I really do believe in accountability can be really, really helpful in forcing you or challenging you to finish things. And I think that had I not done the Kickstarter campaign, I probably would have bailed at 50, I think, because I was so over it.
I can't imagine doing one of those, much less 2, 3, all the way to 100.
But I think, as we were saying earlier, I mean, that was definitely a classic example of pushing through, doing the work, continuing to show up. And there's a lot of things that I learned from it. There's a lot of ways that, that definitely impacted art that I've done since. So I'm so thankful that I did all 100, but it was not pretty getting there. I mean, I think if you ask any of my family or close friends, like there's probably a lot of complaining texts in a variety of places. I remember when I ended up having all 100 in a show in March that opened. I got an opening, which was amazing. And then it was open for 5 days and then it got shut down. And then those all 100 women were basically in their own version of quarantine. But I remember when I was putting those together, like to frame and stuff, I had laid out 25 of them on my floor because I live in a small house. So that was kind of all that fit in my living room on the floor was these 25. And I took a picture and it was a lot. So I was like, wow. And I took a picture. I texted it to my mom and I was like, 25 looks pretty impressive. Like I probably could have just stopped there, but yeah.
And so when you're researching these women, because like on your website, you have a list of all the women. And I mean, I hate to even say it, but like I bet I would say 60% or more of the women on there, they don't ring a bell when I'm reading it. And that speaks to my, inability to read as much history about women as I should. But how did you go about finding all these women? Like was there a certain resource you went to, or did you read, biographies or memoirs about them? Because I mean, just researching, 100 women, enough to do these, very intricate projects for each one. I mean, that's a lot of work. Yeah.
I mean, I always joke that it was definitely more of a research project than it was an art project. I think, you said you're probably not reading enough, as many books about women as you should. I mean, yes, I think it's important for all of us to challenge ourselves to reach out of what we've learned. But I will say that first and foremost, we should just be very angry about our education because we don't have these stories. And I think we don't have I definitely felt that sense of frustration the whole time working on it. I was like, oh, look, it's yet another story of an amazing person, and I've never, ever heard of them. And, we only have so much space in our brains, too. And I think that we can't all have a laundry list of, we don't all hold like 1,000 different people that we can name who were, instrumental in history. But I think that there is something to the fact that we can easily name, the founding fathers in the U.S. We could probably easily name male architects, there's a whole variety of like men that we could name, even if we're not in those specific fields. And then when you are asked to do the same with women, it's really difficult because we just don't have that. Like one, those women didn't really get the same platform. And then two, I think we just as a society haven't done the work to showcase them. So in researching them, I don't know, they came from a little bit all over the place. Like either I would come across an article about something and that would like lead me down a rabbit hole, or because there were quotes, sometimes I would just come across a quote and then think, okay, I want to research that person. So it was a little bit all over the place. Or I would sort of think, okay, I want somebody, I want a scientist, or there was kind of like a specific field. So then I would kind of try to go and see if I could sift through women that had been in that field that were influential. But the problem was in choosing to do quotes is like, then it meant that I had to find a woman who had been on record saying or writing something, which is a whole different because there's lots of stories about women that we just know of in history, but then that we don't have, it just gets much more difficult to find things that they've written or said that have been documented. So that's kind of an additional component and complexity.
Yeah, it's very bizarre that I know who President Chester Arthur is, like the worst president in history. the absolute worst at what he did, and I can't. I draw a blank when it comes to women in history. It is a real problem with our education system.
We should be enraged that we don't know. Because there's so many cool stories, and there's so many women who really contributed. Were instrumental in societal change, and we don't know them.
No. Well, I've got, like we were talking before we recorded, I've got 2 daughters, but up until my daughter was born, I feel like everything in my life was like all male. Like I went to all male boarding school. I worked at all male summer camp. All my jobs have been like very male dominated. And now, about 2 years ago, I started a new job, and I'm the only man in the office. And then I've got 2 daughters and a wife. And so now it's like, the tables have turned, and I realized very quickly how skewed my reading and my thinking and all that kind of stuff is. And but I guess better late than never. Better to know it and adjust than to never figure it out. Thinking about all your projects that you've done, and you mentioned you just, with this, like with the papercut project, you just had the idea and you're like, oh, I'll do that. But I imagine you have ideas all day. So what makes an idea stick? I mean, when does an idea go from like just an idea to something you're going to do? Because you've got such a wide variety of everything you've done, from your books to your zines to your emails. There's so many different things. How do you filter out, or how do they funnel down from million ideas to the one you're going to execute on?
Well, I often don't even feel like I have that many ideas.
Really?
No. I don't know. Yeah, I think then that's an interesting component too, because I think things always look different from the outside than they do internally, right? Mm-hmm. How people perceive you and what they see is then different, how you see that. But I don't feel like I have a flood of ideas. I think that is also the illusion of quote unquote creative people, right? Like we have this vision of creativity that is, some people are creative and some are not. And the ones who are just having aha moments right and left. And that's why they're creative. Yeah. Which is just all wrong. I mean, it's just wrong. That's not how it works. And I think that ideas are often like, I'm working on something right now, personal project, or a thing that I'm working on, and I'm not ready to talk about what it is, but a thing that I have been working on, and it's a thing that's just evolved. Like where I got to what I'm doing right now is very different from what I started out doing, and it's also fed by things I did a year ago. And so there was like even with that, and I feel like I've got, made good headway on it. I don't feel like there was ever a point where I was like, aha, genius idea, I'm doing this, and then sort of set out. It's like, for me, everything is always evolving. So there's like a nugget of something, and I kind of start to pursue it because I'm just interested by too many things. And then maybe that leads to something, and maybe it doesn't. Mm-hmm. I also don't have kids. So I think that I have more time and space, certainly than friends of mine in my age group who have children. Mm-hmm. I just have more space time for myself to pursue that stuff. Yeah. So I think that that's an aspect that I wouldn't want to overlook. And I also don't have a full-time, well, I mean, very few people are going into an office and sitting at a desk anymore, but I don't have a full-time office desk 9-to-5 job. I mean, my job is just me doing what I do. Yeah. Which means that I can spend time pursuing something, from 12 to 2 in the afternoon. Like I don't have a regular schedule. So I think that stuff kind of seeps in here and there, which I think is different from when you are kind of working on your personal creative projects, from 8 to 9 at night, because that's the time you have available. So I think it's kind of a combination of all those things. I don't know. I think there is that illusion of like, great ideas. You don't always know that an idea is great when you first have it. right? You got to kind of work at it for a bit, and you got to kind of test it out. You have to see if other people are interested in it. You have to see what your own take on the idea is. So I think that's why I really try to get people to get away from the idea of, the kind of lightning bolt of inspiration.
Sure.
Because that just doesn't really happen. I mean, sometimes it does, but it's rare.
Well, and even if you did have a lightning bolt inspiration in anything, I would, that's the easy part, like the work.
Yeah, you still got to do the work.
I invented Netflix when I was in 6th grade, actually. I had the idea for
Perfect.
Netflix to run cords from the video store to our house. So, I could have been a billionaire, but I wouldn't really. Well, I want to talk about you personally, because you've lived all over the world. I mean, you've done all this really interesting work, and you've from what I understand, you've gone full circle, and you live in the town where you grew up. And so can you talk about where you grew up and just kind of your early years and where you went to school and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So I live in a small town a little bit west of Tacoma. So it's about 35 minutes from Tacoma. When there's no traffic, I can get to Seattle in a little over an hour, but that never happens.
Yeah.
So I grew up out here. Currently, I live within walking distance of the house that I grew up in, where my parents still live. Yeah. So it's on a peninsula. So there's kind of one road to get here. And I went to public school at all the local schools. Now the house that I rent is actually my landlords both work at the elementary school that I went to.
That's cool.
And I think it's a place that I have a pretty strong connection to the area because my great-grandparents actually homesteaded out here.
Oh, wow.
So we are one of like the older families that's been in the area. So my grandfather, for example, went to high school at what is now the community center. My dad grew up in California, but grew up coming up here to stay with his grandparents in the summer and worked for his uncle who owned the local hardware store. And so there's sort of all these like family place connections on that side, which I think is becoming more and more rare.
Yes.
In this day and age as we kind of move around a lot. But like I mentioned earlier, my mom is from Sweden. So my parents met in Sweden. My dad was an exchange student in college, and they ended up moving out here and kind of settled out here in the mid-'70s and kind of have been out here ever since. And the joke is always like they just came out here to stay for a few years, and here they are many decades later.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think moving home before my husband and I were here, we were in Paris in France, not Texas. Yeah. So in a really big city. And I think that having grown up in a small town, the only thing you want to do when you're younger is like get the hell out of the small town.
Yeah. Yeah.
You just want to be in the city. You want to do all the city things. And, part of that I think is just youth too, I sort of have more energy for that stuff. But then when living kind of permanently in the big city, I was like, man, I really need a little bit more nature. So the opportunity presented itself to move back here. And so that was about 5 years ago. And, there's pros and cons to everything.
Sure.
I think in the time of, I'd say pre-COVID, I've always been a little bit one foot in, one foot out, which I always would tell people is a bad place to be in, because whatever you're doing, wherever you are, good to just commit to that, because you can't play the shoulda, coulda, woulda game.
Yes.
But it has been difficult in some ways, work-wise or just like art-wise. It sometimes felt, things could just flow a little bit better in a city. But since COVID, I mean, I've been so thankful to be here in a small community. We can be outside, minus this last week with hazardous air quality because of the fires. But, it's like, I can easily go on bike rides. I can ride my bike to the post office and the library. And so those things feel very important to sort of just my everyday sense of being. And then it's a peninsula, so we're surrounded by water. And water is very important to me. And just like the Pacific Northwest landscape and geography is really important to me. And when I'm not here, I really miss it. So that kind of sense of place is pretty essential.
Could you talk a little bit more about place? Because I noticed in a lot of your writing and different things that you've said, place is a very important concept. And I've, personally, when I've read some things by Wendell Berry, I feel like he talks a lot about place in a way that makes sense. Because my upbringing is very similar to yours, except it was an East Coast, small eastern North Carolina town. But my family been there forever. Very small community. Everybody knew everybody. And in a lot of ways, I miss it. I miss that tight knit community. That, like you said, there are pros and cons to it, but it's disappearing so quickly. And I feel like as a species, we need community. I feel like that's one of the problems with the way things are set up now, is a lack of community.
Yeah.
And so what helped you kind of develop this love of place? Was there certain books you read or experiences, or has it just always been a part of you?
I think it's just always been a part of me. I mean, I think growing up, it was like my parents, they built our house, and I always joke that it was this, hippie house in the forest.
Yeah.
But, we didn't have, we had neighbors, but I couldn't see them from our house. So, a little bit, I wouldn't say isolated, but just rural, right? But then also plugged into a very tight-knit community and lived close to like my elementary school and the little town. So there was that aspect of place that was important. But I think paired with my mom being from Sweden and feeling like she was very far from her home, and finding it really important to pass along her culture and language to me. So while I was in the Northwest, I grew up speaking only Swedish at home and pretty much only had Swedish kids' books growing up.
Wow.
And we just did very Swedish holidays. Just had a very Swedish upbringing because of that. So I think that probably played a role too, to just have an understanding that place can also be a culture, right? That you feel connected to. And so place isn't always physical. I think that connection to place can be an emotional connection, or, a connection to sort of an emotional place. And so that's always, it's just always been important to me. And I don't think that I guess I just hadn't really been challenged to think about it too much until later on. And then I think moving back home, it's definitely it's something I've been very mindful of and think about a lot. And I think particularly now, as we're talking a lot more about who owns land, who stole land, who has the right to be where they are. And I think about my connection to place currently where I am, which goes back several generations. And that's nothing in comparison to, the Coast Salish people who have been here for millennia.
Sure.
And, their connection to place that runs far deeper than mine. So that's something that I think, in the West, I think that's definitely a growing conversation that I see too about land and people. And I think that's an important one to have because I think if you feel a sense of connection to place, you understand why that's important, and you understand how, or at least have a sense of how detrimental it can be to be removed from place. Same would go for people who are forced to flee the places that they love and can't return to them. If they're political refugees or seeking asylum. I think we have this in the media. I think we often have this mindset of like, oh, people are coming to America, land of opportunity, and, they're here, and whatever sort of talking points we hear about that. But I think it's important to remember that most times people want to be in the places that they have emotional and physical connections to. Not always, but, that is a thing that is very important. And imagine for a second, if you're listening to this and you feel like you too have a connection to place, or place feels important to you, just imagine what it would feel like to be told that you have to leave and you can never come back. I mean, just to even have to, consider that feels heartbreaking. So imagine what that feels like in reality. And I think that I don't really hear that conversation too much when we're talking about immigration or refugees and just kind of what that looks like and the emotional toll that takes.
No, I think that's a wise and timely thing to think about. And as you've been trying to wrap your head around that, as I have, and I think as anybody that's even halfway thoughtful has been trying to wrap their head around that now more than ever, are there any resources that you've come across that have helped you get a new perspective on that, whether it's blogs or books or, anything? Does anything come to mind that has been helpful? Because the reason I ask, like I said, this whole podcast is selfish because I'm trying to learn. I'm looking for help. So, does anything come to mind?
Well, I did work. So I worked on a documentary called Afghan Cycles, which is about women cyclists in Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. And within that story, there's a few of the women who end up being refugees. And I think just kind of having a personal look into what that entailed, or just being close to that story, was, just very influential in thinking about what that meant and what that looked like. And I think, it's any time that we can try to have a personal connection, whether that's through a story or through a person, I think the more that we can sort of broaden our own scope and be open to that stuff is pretty essential. I can't, other than that, I don't, there's nothing that pops to mind. I will say that I think having grown up speaking two languages, I was just talking about this with a friend a few weeks ago who was born in Mexico. And we were just talking about growing up speaking a different language. And she was talking about sort of being with her friends when she was younger. And I said, it's interesting. Obviously, I'm a white. My mom came from a country that, she wasn't fleeing because of political reasons. So growing up in that sense, like, there's a lot of privilege in that. But I will say that when I was little, I felt very outside my friend group, because I felt that everything that I did at home was very different. And I didn't know anyone growing up that was in a similar situation. And that felt very lonely at times. And I felt I just felt weird. Sure. And now, in retrospect, I can see that for what it is, and realize that I never was ostracized because I spoke a different language. I was never not encouraged to talk about it. There's a lot of things that I was allowed to do that kids who come from other backgrounds, it's different. But I will say that having lived in other countries, I think you kind of start to realize, like, well, maybe I just don't entirely fit in anywhere, which is why I think it's important to realize that, home or place can be physical, but then, like I said before, it can be emotional, it can be cultural. So I might physically feel at home here, but that doesn't mean that I feel culturally at home in the U.S.
No, that all makes perfect sense. And I think what you said about, the documentary that you worked on, I think when you can focus in on individuals, I think that, at least in my experience, that can give you such a better understanding and obviously more compassion for things when you're looking at something through an individual's eyes. And that's why I love reading biographies. I feel like I've learned so much more from biographies than I do from any just like a broad history where it's just like a bunch of dates and events and that kind of thing. When you can really dig into one person and how certain events shape their lives, I feel like that's, I don't know, unless you're crazy and just like a narcissist or something, it's hard not to have compassion for individual people if you get to know them.
Well, and that's what we have the capacity to do is huge. I think what our brains are sort of capable of is not having thousands of connections online, right? That's too much.
It is.
But our brains have evolved to have direct connections with individuals, which I think is why those connections are so powerful. And when we're talking about changing perspective or shifting in how we look at things, usually that does come about because of an individual story or interaction.
Yeah. And then that loops back into the whole thing we were talking about earlier about community, about needing, we are built to need community, and community doesn't mean necessarily your best friends. I mean, it can be, your annoying neighbor is just as much a part of the community as your best friend, but it's part of the community. And I don't know, I've read a bunch of books about that, and I am kind of convinced that the lack of community is one of the biggest problems facing all of us right now in this country, in the U.S. Now we just need to figure it out. I think you're the person to figure it out. So that's your next book.
Oh, okay, great.
I'll be your agent.
No
20%. No.
Yeah, great.
So thinking about other creatives and other artists, who comes to mind as somebody that or a number of people, who do you admire in the creative world?
Oh, so many people. Well, one that pops to mind kind of immediately is a Portland-based illustrator named Lisa Congdon. Mm-hmm. And she has written several books on creative process, and I think she's really good at distilling feelings and emotions that we're all feeling and expressing them in a way that can have that balance of like darkness and hope at the same time. Mm-hmm. And I just really like her work. And I think, well, you were asking earlier about social media. She actually has a fun little chart about what you should post that's based off of, what you're personally connected to. And, but I just like her work, and I like her openness and her just ability to sort of synthesize what a lot of us are feeling, into something visual, which I think is a skill that I think a lot of people aim for, but it's really difficult.
Sure.
So she definitely comes to mind. I mean, somebody who this is not a person who's been alive, but her story is so compelling to me, is a Swedish artist named Hilma af Klint, who has gained a lot of notoriety in the last few years because she was born in the late 1800s, and basically not that many people saw her work. And then it was kind of discovered not too long ago, and now she's kind of been identified as essentially one of, if not the first abstract modernist artists.
Okay.
So kind of before the work of Kandinsky or Mondrian, some of the male artists who we think of as the firsts. And I got to see a show of hers that was at the Guggenheim last year.
Oh,
and
cool.
I just watched a documentary about her. That's why she's kind of top of mind. But her story is just really compelling, especially when thinking about, certain women getting a platform or not getting a platform, and connection to art and process and doing the work. I mean, just like the body of work that she created is amazing. So that's one that comes to mind as well.
Do you remember the name of the documentary?
It is called it's Beyond the Visible is what it's called.
I'll link all this stuff so people can click through and see it. One thing I did want to talk about, kind of related to creativity, kind of unrelated, but you've mentioned that how important nature is to everything you're doing. And in our call, when we talked on the phone a while back, you had mentioned that you had led a trip for youth leadership in the wilderness. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that and kind of what the trip was and what you got out of the process of leading these kids. Yeah.
So I grew up going to a YMCA camp pretty near my home, which was affiliated with the Tacoma YMCA. And so I grew up being a camp kid, and then that evolved into me being a camp counselor. And I think once a camp counselor, always a camp counselor in approach.
Yeah, I was one.
Yeah, there you go. But yeah, so through that, when I was younger, there was a leadership program that kind of went 3 years. So there's sort of different summer programs for different age groups, and you kind of worked your way through. And so one of those was a program called Quest, which was a week-long canoeing and backpacking trip up at Lake Ozette, up at the northwest corner of Washington. Mm-hmm. And so I did that when I was 15 or 16. And that was very important to me, sort of in my own personal development. And then I got to lead that trip in my early 20s as well, because I did a summer leading trips. And last summer, they needed a trip leader. So they kind of reached out and were like, I know you haven't led trips in a while, but would you be willing to come back? And I kind of jumped at that opportunity, and it was just fantastic. And I was actually supposed to lead both of the trips this summer, but unfortunately they both got canceled because of COVID. But yeah, pretty funny to come back in my late 30s, which, in teen eyes is like an ancient grandmother.
Yeah. Do you have any grandkids?
Yeah, totally. I didn't know what TikTok was, and didn't know all the memes that they just would constantly talk about. But, I just love the outdoors for facilitating lessons and conversations. And that trip in particular is a leadership oriented trip. So, sort of a lot of the leadership role is sort of put onto the teens. Mm-hmm. So they kind of take responsibility for a lot of the kind of when it's time to get up, when it's time to cook, routes, and that kind of a thing. So it's, as a facilitator, as a leader, you're kind of there more as a facilitator and have kind of a step back, making sure that everything's safe, obviously, but kind of letting them take the reins, which I think it's so fun to have done that early on, and then also led it in my early 20s, which, now with age, I can look back and realize how young I was then, but of course felt very mature. Mm-hmm. And then also realizing that a lot of these issues that these teens are dealing with, it's a lot of the same stuff. It looks a little different, right? Because the tools and stuff and what's available to them has changed. But I think at the core, these sort of anxieties or fears or interests, a lot of it's very similar. And I think to work with teens, I think is so kind of, for me, it feels very valuable on a personal level because it always sort of shifts how I look at things. Yeah. And I don't know, you're just reminded of what it's like to see the world with those eyes, which challenges you to think about things differently yourself too. And it's so cool to get to interact with people at that age too, because it's a really interesting age. You're kind of on the cusp of being an adult, but not quite yet. But you have enough tools kind of in your toolkit to survive. And just kind of how that plays out in the outdoors is pretty fascinating.
You mentioned it was really important to you. Why was it so important to you when you were a teenager, when you went through it for the first time as a camper? I mean, how were you different when you left the experience than when you showed up?
Well, I think part of it was kind of the community aspect of what we talked about before. So I mentioned that kind of always felt like a little bit of a outside weird kid, but I always felt really at home and a sense of place when I was at camp. And so often a lot of the kids that you end up doing the program with. So there was this kind of sense of doing something together with other people that I knew and feeling very sort of emotionally supported, which I think is really powerful at that age, just because you can feel very disconnected at that age. Sure. So that was really important. And then too, I think too, I was always really interested in leadership when I was younger, on the verge of maybe being a little bit of a control freak. I definitely was the one who would take the lead on all group projects. And it was just easier for me to do all the work than have other people do it. But, that's something I'm still working on.
I know the feeling.
But, the leadership component, it's just so powerful to get to feel like you're in charge at that age, but not in a way that it leads to an abuse of power. Just I get to make decisions right now, and what I decide is going to impact how this day plays out. And I think that is very important for kids. And I think that maybe has shifted a little bit too, as I think, we've gotten a little bit more restrictive and tighter just with school, and just because, it's a different world that we live in these days. But I think that those types of things are still just as essential, if not more essential now. And that sort of just allowing you to fail too, that you're going to mess up, and that's just part of the game. And to know, that's an important lesson to have early on. And I think that particularly leadership trips that are wilderness oriented, when you're outside, I mean, you're just going to fail. That's sort of hopefully you fail in a way that doesn't lead to, people being injured, or, hopefully the failures are like you spilling the pot of rice,
sure,
right? And then needing to clean it up. But that's inevitably going to lead to a lot of lessons.
Oh yeah. And I think one of the cool things about the outdoors is that you get instant feedback. Like if you make a mistake, it's pretty quickly, or at least within a couple hours, you're going to realize it, whether it's with your dress, how you dress, or what you decide to eat. And so it's this pretty quick feedback loop, and you can develop a lot quicker. And a lot of the nonsense is cut out. It's very raw. And I did a semester of Knowles up in your neck of the woods there in Washington State when I was in college, and same experience that you just described. I mean, I was 20, I guess, when I did it, but just a formative, life-changing experience.
Yeah.
Leadership, respect for nature, taking responsibility. And I would think that it's more important now than ever. Well, hopefully you'll be able to lead that thing next summer. Knowles is operating on a limited capacity, so hopefully they'll be able to figure out how to get it going, because that's super important.
It's very important, and also because it is kind of kids who have been at that, in that sort of family for community for a while, it's something they look forward to all year long. And for some kids, that's their sense of place, like we talked about earlier.
Sure.
Camp, I think that's why I feel pretty strongly about camp, but some kids hate camp, and that's fine. But there are kids that is the space where they feel safe and protected and like their full selves. And it's the one time in the year that they truly feel that, which makes it that much more powerful, and also that much more kind of heartbreaking when they don't have access to it.
Definitely. I just looked at the timer, and we're at 1 hour and 1 minute, which is crazy. I should keep this timer more front and center, because I always am surprised when I dig around and find it. So I've got a few quick questions that I was hoping we could run through, if you don't mind, and then I'll let you get back to it. What are your favorite books? Like, what are the most important books that you've read? I know you read a lot, but are there any books that you would say were very, very formative, just kind of in your life and career?
Ooh, I mean, that's a big question. I feel like, one of the books that has really stuck with me that I read this year was The Overstory.
People keep telling me to read that, and I've given it to a bunch of people, but I haven't actually read it. Everybody says it's the best book they've ever read. Yeah,
I mean, it's just it's funny because I read it in January, which now feels like an entire lifetime ago.
Yeah, it kind of
was. But it definitely shifted just how I thought about things, and it's particularly interesting to consider that book right now, just as we're in the midst of these fires too. Mm-hmm. So that was a book that felt very, very important. Other books. Well, in terms of creativity, there's a great, we were talking earlier about kind of like ritual and routine. And there's two books that I really love and always recommend to people, and written by a guy named Mason Curry, and they're called Daily Rituals. Mm-hmm. And so the first one is, I don't remember what the exact title of the first one is, but the first one is like Daily Rituals of Creatives and Artists or whatever. And it's really just about all kinds of, creative people from across like history and what their daily routines looked like. Yeah. And then the second one that he came out with is women specific. So he kind of realized that there was a small percentage of women in the first book. So then he did an all kind of women focused book. And I just love them because they're fun. You can just pick one up and read, one section about one person. And I just love anything where you get insight into how somebody else kind of functions.
Oh yeah. That's the whole reason I do the podcast.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, that's something good. Another book that I read last year, which I found really powerful, was a book called How to Do Nothing. And that's by an artist who's in the Bay Area named Jenny Odell is her name. And that book was kind of all about, well, it is what it sounds like, but it's just kind of this cultural critique of, we're in this sort of rat race of productivity all the time. And everything we do is kind of based around being distracted. Mm-hmm. And so this concept of how to do nothing, which is actually not nothing, it's actually very full, right? But that, just shifting your perspective in terms of how you're using your time.
Have you ever read a book called Deep Work by Cal Newport?
I have not read it, but I know of it.
Yeah, it's I really got a lot out of Deep Work, but I have not read How to Do Nothing, and I'm going to read that because I'm really interested in that idea of kind of trying to avoid a lot of these silly distractions. I mean, I think it's good to let your mind wander sometimes and not try to be like Tim Ferriss with the all day productivity hacks and that kind of, but at the same time, I don't want to be distracted, especially when somebody's making money off of my attention. So I will definitely read that. That's great. Thank you for those.
Oh, I thought of another book just because I read it every year, but, so Tove Jansson, who was a Finnish writer who wrote, the Moomin books, which are Moomin Trolls. They're like very popular books. Kind of, I think people think of them as kids' books, but you can read them as an adult and you get a lot out of them. Anyway, she has this book called The Summer Book, which she wrote kind of towards the end of her career after her mother died. And the plot is like this young girl and her grandmother who's kind of towards the end of her life, and them just living in their cabin that they live in. And it's just like over the course of a summer. And there's just something poetic and really deep and powerful about it. So I try to read that every summer.
Cool. I'll link to that. And then people may notice in the notes, I'm not linking to Amazon anymore. I'm linking to IndieBound to try. Yeah, I should have done that a long time ago. But again, I'm a work in progress. I'm trying my best, but every step of the way I learned how much of a dumbass I was yesterday. And so
yeah, I mean, the only thing that we can all do is just to work to be a little bit better tomorrow than we were today. So
I'm trying.
Yeah.
So we talked a bit about the outdoors. Does any experience come to mind that was your most powerful experience in the outdoors? And powerful could be it scared the shit out of you. It could be it was funny. Could be just it was memorable. Is there any powerful experience that stands out?
Well, I did a 3-week course with Outward Bound when I was 16, 17. That was pretty powerful. I mean, in terms of like at a time, I had just gotten back. I was an exchange student in Sweden for a year for my junior year of high school.
Oh, wow.
And I'd come back from that and then did Outward Bound. And it was like, talk about just a lot of things that kind of set you on a certain course. And sort of both of those things are very memorable in my mind in terms of things that I ended up doing. But I definitely remember that. Again, I think it's why I feel so strongly about getting kids outside, because I know that was such a powerful experience for me doing that. So that was we did it in the High Sierras. And that was pretty cool because it was a scholarship program that was run through our YMCA camp. So they basically granted 2 scholarships a summer to kids, that were kind of in the leadership program. So I had a lot of friends who did similar program too. And we, along with the scholarship, we got a pair of boots. And I still have those. They're La Sportiva mountaineering boots. I still have them. I still use them very regularly. And, I just was on a backpacking trip at the end of August, and I was just cracking up because I was like, man, I've just been like walking in these boots for so long, I just kind of love that.
That's my wife has done some Outward Bound or did some Outward Bound courses, and same experience. I mean, just really, really life changing. I cannot, as soon as my girls are old enough, I want them on the trips like that. Because, I mean, assuming it fits with their personality and everything, I don't want to force them. But it's, it's so great. So kind of final question, knowing everything you know with all your experience with creativity and knowing how much you don't know. I mean, I think you're very clear that you don't have all the answers to all this stuff. But do you have any parting words of wisdom to people that are listening to this podcast who, love the West, love the sense of place, and have creative inclinations, but, maybe they're not moving forward at the pace they'd like them to? What would be your words of wisdom to those people?
I think it's just start. Mm-hmm. Like, you don't know until you try. And I think, you just have to begin. Because if you begin, then you have something to work with. But if you don't ever begin, then you don't know. And I think that often we don't begin because we're really afraid. We put a lot of expectation on the outcome. And I always say like process over product, because we're always so outcome product driven. Like, what is the end result going to be? And if you can instead shift your mind to sort of think, I'm investing in this process because this process is good for me, regardless of what I end up making, right? Like, it is the act of creativity and the act of making art that brings the most value. And that's, I think as a society, that's basically the opposite of what we're trained to do, right? We're very, like you're saying, like, productivity hacks or whatever. It's like we're constantly thinking about how can I produce this thing faster, but whatever. But to just reinvest in that process and allow yourself to start that process.
That's perfect advice and a great way to wrap it up. So how can people connect with you online? Where's the best place to find you on the old internet?
Yeah, well, the website's annabrones.com. My Instagram is annabrones. Fortunately, there aren't a lot of us, so I kind of have all the handles. And then people can sign up for my newsletters. Like I said, I send out that monthly newsletter called Creative Fuel. Probably still going to be doing some Creative Fuel challenges here in the future as well. So you can sign up for those too.
Perfect. Well, I have links to everything in the episode notes, but thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time to do this.
Yeah,
and thank you for all the great stuff you put out in the world. I personally have benefited from a lot of it, and I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast, and thanks for listening to that particular episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Before you go, I've got 3 quick things. Number 1, if you like the podcast, please do me a huge favor. Either pass it along to a friend who may be interested, share it on your social media, or go to iTunes and give it a 5-star review. All those things would mean a lot to me, and they would really help to spread the word about the podcast. Number 2, if you've listened to many of these episodes, you know that I love reading and I love talking about books. Every other month, I send out a quick email with a few books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The subjects are varied, but they're pretty much all nonfiction with an emphasis on history, biographies, adventure narratives, and topics related to the American West. There are no sales pitches for ranches, no spam, no other kind of nonsense, just books. So if you'd like to sign up for the list, head to Mountain and Prairie/reading, or just go to Mountain and Prairie and there's a massive tab at the top that says book recommendations. Click on it. There are a ton of good books that I've read. Some of the old email lists are on there. You can go crazy. There are a lot of books. And finally, if you know anyone I should interview for the podcast, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. All my contact info is at mountainandprairie.com, and I'm on all the social media stuff, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, blah, blah, blah. So feel free to reach out. I'd love to have some recommendations and suggestions of interesting people I should meet. All right, that's it. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.